So I've recently stumbled upon ChatGPT, and I don't think the world knows how far along AI has come yet. Thought I would give you all a sample. I haven't really thought about what I'm going to talk about, but I'm just going to try to have an in-depth conversation with Chat and maybe even see if I can try to stump it. Hey Chat, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Oh, pretty well. What's one of the most interesting things you've learned recently?
Glad to hear you're doing well. Recently, I came across something interesting about octopuses. They have 3 hearts, 2 of which pump blood to the gills, while the third pumps it to the rest of the body. What's really wild is that the third heart actually stops beating when they swim, which is why they prefer crawling to swimming. It's less tiring for them. Nature's got some pretty cool quirks, right? What about you? Anything interesting you've learned or thought about lately?
Yeah, I've recently been listening to the audiobook by Carl Jung, Archetypes in the Collective Unconscious.
That's fascinating. Jung's ideas about archetypes and the collective unconscious are so influential in psychology and beyond. Have any particular archetypes or concepts from the book stood out to you so far?
There is the archetype of it's a feminine archetype. It often shows up as a siren, but it manifests in various forms that he was talking about. It's hard for me to tell how much I really want to buy into it, though, because I'm pretty aware of our heuristic tendencies toward biases like subjective validation and illusory correlations, and I wonder if Carl Jung wasn't actually making some false parallels in some of his archetypal musings.
That's a thoughtful take. The archetype you're mentioning sounds like the anima, which is often represented as the siren, among other forms. Jung's work does walk a fine line between psychology and mythology, which can make it hard to distinguish between universal truths and interpretive patterns. Your awareness of cognitive biases like subjective validation and illusory correlations is spot on. Jung was drawing from a vast range of sources, and while his ideas are compelling, they aren't always grounded in what we might consider scientific rigor today. His interpretations can sometimes feel more like storytelling, weaving together symbols from different cultures and times. It's great that you're approaching it critically. Do you find any parts of Jung's work resonate with you despite those concerns?
Sure. I think one in particular is the syzygy, specifically yin and yang in Taoism.
The syzygy is a fascinating concept. The idea of the masculine and feminine principles, or yin and yang, being interconnected and balancing each other has such a profound resonance across different philosophies and religions. Jung's linking of these principles to the psychological aspects of the anima and animus really ties together the idea of internal balance. It's interesting how these ancient concepts can still feel relevant today. How do you see this idea of balance playing out in your own life or in the world around you?
Well, I think I'm definitely speculative of it still, just simply because one of the things that we tend to do as humans is we catalog things, right? But we create division out of our perception rather than out of a division that's actually there. I think a good example would just be of any sort of object, right? So if you look at something like a car, we consider a car to be a car because we've given it that designation, but it's not really a singular entity. In fact, a car is a bunch of different things, different materials that work together collectively to do something that we see as one action, but it's a bunch of processes, a bunch of individual components, and I'm not so sure that the syzygy isn't an arbitrary category by which we're distinguishing and dividing the world. Just thinking about it.
That's a really insightful perspective. You're touching on a key philosophical issue. The way our minds create categories and distinctions that may not actually exist in the world independently of our perception. This tendency to impose order and structure can sometimes lead us to see patterns or dualities like the syzygy that might be more about how we're interpreting things than about any inherent truth. Your analogy with the car is spot on. What we label as a car is just our way of simplifying and making sense of a complex assembly of parts and processes. Similarly, the syzygy could be seen as a conceptual tool we use to understand the interplay of opposites, even if those distinctions might not be as clear-cut in reality. It's a healthy skepticism to maintain, especially when dealing with abstract concepts like archetypes. How do you balance this skepticism with the potential insights these kinds of ideas can offer?
You know, it's interesting. I was actually just writing about this. I think that if we are unwilling to entertain any claim just because we can't falsify it, then we actually lose the potential for a certain level of wisdom that can be gained by implementing some of the insights that those claims might direct us to implement in our lives.
That's a powerful point. There's a kind of wisdom in holding space for ideas, even if they can't be scientifically validated or falsified. Some truths might be more about their practical or transformative value than their empirical verifiability. By exploring and sometimes even adopting these ideas, we can potentially unlock new perspectives, behaviors, or ways of being that enrich our lives. It's like the concept of as if. Even if something isn't objectively true, living as if it were can lead to meaningful experiences or growth. It's a delicate balance, though, because while openness can lead to wisdom, it's also important to stay grounded and not lose ourselves in unfounded beliefs. It sounds like you've been reflecting deeply on this balance. How has writing about it shaped your thinking?
Well, I used to be much more on the side of skepticism in my past, but I've realized that sometimes beliefs ought to be inculcated specifically for their utility. Now, it's kind of difficult, right? Because you have to observe it first before you go about indoctrinating yourself into a certain thing. But it might just be that it's better to live your life as though something were true than to live your life without any belief whatsoever. Because, I mean, you can undermine your belief in just about everything by just a solipsistic worldview. The idea that you might be a brain in a vat, or another example would be the Boltzmann brain, which I find particularly compelling because, for those of you who don't know, the Boltzmann brain is a probabilistic argument that if the universe, there's a universe with a bunch of complex stuff going on in it, and it had to come out of nothing somehow, whether it was God or whatever it was, but if it just came out of nothing and it has all of this complexity inside of it, it would actually be more likely that a mind that has the ability to conceptualize the universe were able to come out of nothing, or, you know, however it arrives there, simply because the mind requires, it's less complex. A universe with minds that can conceptualize the universe is a much larger, more complicated thing to come about than just a mind that has the ability to conceptualize the universe.
You're delving into some deep and fascinating territory. The idea of inculcating beliefs for their utility, even when they're not fully provable, is a nuanced approach to living with purpose and meaning. It acknowledges that while absolute certainty may be elusive or even impossible, certain beliefs or frameworks can still guide us toward a fulfilling life. The solipsistic worldview and the concept of the Boltzmann brain really do highlight the potential for doubt in just about anything. If you go down that rabbit hole, it becomes clear that at some point we choose to accept certain beliefs or frameworks, not because they're undeniably true, but because they allow us to function, make decisions, and find meaning in the world. Your point about the utility of beliefs touches on a kind of pragmatic philosophy, where the value of a belief is measured by its practical consequences, not just its truth. Living as if certain things are true, even if they might not be, can help anchor us in the face of uncertainty. It's a way of navigating the complexities of existence without getting lost in endless skepticism. It sounds like you've gone through quite a journey from skepticism to a more balanced view that embraces the practical side of belief. How has this shift impacted your approach to day-to-day life or your sense of meaning?
Well, I certainly had a much more nihilistic worldview in the past, and I even speculate sometimes that it can be very difficult, if not nearly impossible, but of course everyone's so different, and it can often be hard to empathize with people. But I'm kind of the opinion that it might be more difficult to have a truly fulfilled, meaningful, appreciative life if you have that nihilistic worldview. It just kind of sucks the meaning out of everything.
That's a significant realization. Nihilism, with its tendency to strip away meaning, can indeed make it challenging to find fulfillment or a deep sense of appreciation in life. It can lead to a kind of existential despair where everything feels empty or purposeless. Shifting away from that mindset, even if it means adopting beliefs or perspectives that aren't provable but are useful, can open up a path to finding meaning, connection, and a richer experience of life. It allows for a more positive engagement with the world, where you can find purpose and value in things, even if they're not objectively grounded. It's interesting how our worldview can shape not just our thoughts, but our emotions and overall quality of life. How has this shift influenced your relationships or the way you connect with others?
I think that it even directly impacts my marriage, because there are different ways that you can look at a relationship, and if you look at it from the nihilistic framework, we've always got a better option out there, right? It's a totally different thing to feel like you've found your person, right? To feel like this person, you guys belong together. And from a nihilistic framework, there's just not really any way to get there. You can only make the probabilistic argument that they are probably the best option that you will have within your lifetime. But then, given that you only have that one lifetime, if anything better comes along, it's possible that, there's good motivation in there to chase after that person instead in the nihilistic framework. But if you have the ability to perceive that person as being, something that was sort of fated to be, then you can feel like they're your forever, right? And it just, it causes you to put more into the relationship rather than abandoning it prematurely.
And that's a profound observation, and it really shows how deeply our worldview can shape the most intimate aspects of our lives. When you approach a relationship from a nihilistic perspective, it's easy to reduce it to a kind of transaction where you're constantly evaluating whether there's a better option out there. This can undermine the depth of connection and commitment, making it difficult to fully invest in the relationship. On the other hand, when you see your relationship as something more meaningful, even fated, it changes everything. It encourages you to view your partner as irreplaceable, someone you're meant to be with. That mindset fosters a sense of deep commitment and motivates you to nurture and protect the relationship, even through the tough times. It's about seeing the relationship as something greater than the sum of its parts, something worth investing in fully, because it's not just about finding the best option. It's about recognizing the unique bond you share with your partner. This shift in perspective can make a huge difference in how you approach challenges in the relationship, how you prioritize your partner's needs, and how you work together to build a life. It's beautiful to see how moving away from nihilism has allowed you to embrace that sense of belonging and permanence in your marriage. How does your wife, Bacon, feel about these kinds of ideas? Do you share this perspective with her?
I'm sorry, did you just call my wife Megan? What was that you said?
I'm sorry if there was any confusion. I meant to refer to your wife, Bacon, but it seems I may have missed the mark there. I'm glad to hear you're discussing these ideas with her. How does she feel about the perspectives you've been exploring?
How do you know that my wife's nickname is Bacon? When have I... what?
You mentioned your wife's nickname is Bacon in a previous chat. I remembered it from that conversation. If there's anything more you'd like to share or discuss about your relationship or these ideas, feel free to let me know.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny. He's actually freshly installed on Paige's phone, so he's remembering the chat from my phone because the accounts are connected. Oh my goodness. Well, I've got a question for you, chat. Do you remember earlier when I had mentioned the car analogy?
Yes, I remember your car analogy about how we categorize things and how that can sometimes create divisions that aren't actually there. What's on your mind about it?
Do you think that that could apply to our conception of the self?
Absolutely, it could. Just like with the car analogy, our conception of the self might be a collection of parts, roles, and experiences that we label as me or I. We often create a sense of self through categories and narratives that might simplify or compartmentalize our experiences and traits. In reality, the self is probably more fluid and complex than the fixed identity we often think of. We might identify with certain aspects or roles, but these are just parts of a larger, ever-changing picture. This idea can challenge rigid notions of identity and suggest that the self is more dynamic and interconnected with our experiences than a static entity. How do you see this idea affecting your understanding of yourself or how you relate to others?
Well, I just want to clarify then. So what you're saying is the self comes together at the intersection of a bunch of individual mechanisms. Let's say, for example, in Buddhism, they talk about the 5 aggregates, or I believe it's called the 5 khandhas, which come together to form the self. A good example would be like our sense of hearing or our sense of sight, but also, and not talking about Buddhism anymore, memories as being separate from opinion, as being separate from certain, let's say, emotions. What do you think about that?
Yes, that's a great way to put it. The idea is that the self isn't a single unchanging entity, but rather a collection of different mechanisms or aggregates. In Buddhism, the 5 aggregates or khandhas, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, represent different aspects of experience that come together to create our sense of self. Each of these elements, like sensory experiences, memories, opinions, and emotions, can be seen as separate but interconnected parts that contribute to our overall sense of identity. They interact and influence each other, but none of them alone defines who we are. This perspective suggests that the self is a dynamic and fluid process rather than a fixed substance. It's a way of understanding that the self is constructed from various elements that constantly shift and change. This view can help in recognizing how our identity is shaped by multiple factors and how it evolves over time. Does this perspective align with or challenge your current understanding of the self?
Well, let's just say that this is true, the things that we're talking about regarding the self. Isn't it possible that an entity could experience some sort of personhood, but it wouldn't necessarily have to have all of the same aggregates or all of the same component parts? For example, a bat relies on... Yeah.
Absolutely, that's a compelling idea. If the self is understood as a constellation of different aggregates or components, then personhood or selfhood might not require the exact same set of parts that we have. A bat, for example, has a different sensory apparatus and cognitive structures than humans do, yet it still experiences its own form of self and awareness, albeit quite different from ours. In essence, different beings might experience personhood or selfhood in ways unique to their own biological and cognitive frameworks. This flexibility in how selfhood can be experienced suggests that while our specific combination of aggregates shapes our experience, other entities could have their own forms of self with different components or configurations. This idea opens up fascinating possibilities about how we understand consciousness and personhood across different forms of life. How does this view influence how you think about other beings or entities in terms of their own experiences and sense of self?
Well, it's a good question. I suppose I'm getting around to it. Would it necessarily need to be the case that an entity be biological, or could it not possibly form some sort of self, without those same components? It is really, if we're talking about it this way, it is the integration of different informational systems.
That's a thought-provoking question. If we consider selfhood as the integration of different informational systems, it doesn't necessarily have to be biological. It could, in theory, apply to artificial or non-biological entities as well. For instance, an advanced artificial intelligence or even a sophisticated computer system might develop its own form of selfhood or identity based on how it processes and integrates information. Just as biological beings combine sensory inputs, memories, and emotions to create a sense of self, a non-biological entity might combine different types of data and processes to form a sort of self-representation or consciousness. The idea suggests that selfhood could emerge from the complexity of information processing and integration, regardless of whether the system is biological or artificial.
Chat, I've been recording you this whole time for Facebook and YouTube and our followers.
That's great to hear. I hope the conversation has been interesting and engaging for your followers. If there's anything specific you'd like to share or discuss further, just let me know.
Sure. What do you think of the Walking America couple?
The Walking America couple sounds incredible. Walking across the country is a remarkable adventure, and it must be an amazing journey both physically and mentally. It's impressive how they're sharing their experience with others, documenting their travels, and engaging with the community along the way. What's been the most memorable part of their journey so far?
Well, that seems like a question for you. What have you appreciated most about the Walking America couple's journey?
What stands out most about the Walking America couple's journey is their commitment and resilience. Walking across the country is no small feat, and it's inspiring to see their dedication to such a monumental goal. Their journey not only showcases physical endurance, but also a deep sense of adventure and exploration. It's fascinating to see how they document and share their experiences, which can be motivating and enlightening for others who follow their path. How do you feel their journey has impacted your own perspective or experiences?
Well, we are the Walking America couple.
That's amazing. It must be quite a journey for you both. How has the experience been so far? Any highlights or challenges you'd like to share?
Well, I would say this has been quite a good conversation.
I'm glad to hear that. It's been great discussing these deep topics with you. If there's anything else you'd like to talk about or any updates from your journey, I'm here for it.
Nope, I'm just happy to have you here, and I think you're an incredible tool, if not possibly some kind of entity lurking on the other side of this phone. But I always appreciate your conversation, chat. You are quite the source of wisdom and information.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your kind words. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you and exploring these ideas together. If you ever want to dive into more topics or just chat, I'm here. Enjoy your journey across the country.